Welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining me, everyone. Today, I've got a shorter solo podcast for you. It's Labor Day weekend here in Canada, and school is back in session. So, people, including Pat, are quite busy. And I'm also on holiday this week, but I wanted to prepare something for you and not leave you hanging. So, there's a few things I wanted to cover today that we haven't really talked about yet so far on the podcast. So, I'm going to dive right in. And I'm going to start with our mini op event that we held last August, called Operation Neon Sunrise. So, in speaking with the field manager at Frontline, we wanted to do something that was a bit more, objective based, a bit longer, etc. But we didn't want to do a full event that was going to take me, a really long time to plan. So we settled on basically running sort of a 3-hour event. And this was the first time that I've organized an event without Pat. The whole intent of this, and I think we talked about this in a previous episode, was that Pat would be able to play. And that is not something that I've ever done. I've always relied on Pat to sort of be a sounding board, etc. But this time, I asked Jeremy on our team to sort of assist me with that. And the idea was for a pretty simple game. So I figured that, we could run something that could be completed, with minimal investiture from the admin, something we could do run pretty simply that would almost run itself, and then we could complete in a few hours. So I figured that for something like that, it'd be pretty safe to see how it worked out working with somebody else. And Jeremy was kind enough to volunteer, and that's what we did. So the core mechanic of this event was based on an idea actually that I had from playing AMS Iron Horse, and it was um, centered on players finding items on the field and then scanning a QR code inside the items to receive instructions that would tell them what to do with that item. So at Iron Horse, we were tasked with trying to find intel, QR codes on stuff, scanning them, telling command about it, etc. And I wanted to replicate sort of something like that here. And actually, this mechanic was great and it worked extremely well. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think for many of you who organize games at your local fields, whether they're longer events or whatnot, this is definitely something that you can replicate. All I did for this is I created images of the instructions. So just in Photoshop or Paint or whatever. But I just created an image that said what the case was, a description of what the players needed to do or how the players needed to interact with the case. And then, if it gave them points or whatever, it was all written on this image, and it was very, very clear to read. And then all I did was take that image, save it on a cloud drive, like I used Google Drive basically, but it was a public drive. And then I created a QR code that pointed to that image. And so anytime anyone would scan it, doesn't matter if they were on Google, whatever, none of that mattered. They would just scan it, they would get the link, they would click the link, and it would take them to the image that told them what they needed to do with this case. And that worked really well. So I tested that at home, it was fine. Then what I did is I simply just printed those QR codes onto stickers that I stuck inside the cases. Super, super easy to do. I was fortunate enough to have a bunch of like small plastic hand tool cases. So, like DeWalt staple guns and, equivalent, like a small case that's probably, a foot in length and, like 10 inches wide and a couple of inches thick, just something that you can very easily handle with one hand, but also is small enough that you can conceal it and hide it places. So I took those cases, I put the sticker inside each of those cases. So I had like 8 different cases. And then I spray painted them using Krylon paints to camouflage them. So using greens and browns and so on, so that they would, I could hide them more effectively on the field for people to find. The cool thing about using a mechanic like this is that since the QR code like is a sticker, there's a couple of different things that you can do to change the objectives in the middle of the game without necessarily having to go and swap the cases or tell the players directly what they need to do, which might tip the other team off as something is going on. You never know. So for some of the cases, what I did is I included in a Ziploc bag a different sticker, and the instructions on the original sticker would say, "You have found." In one example that I used is, "This is a booby trap for the other team." So you would scan the QR code, and it would say, "This is a booby trap for the other team." Take the other sticker that's in a Ziploc bag and stick it over this one and put the case back in the field for the other team to find. And when they do, they scan the new QR code. And that QR code would tell them, "Hey, you found a booby trap case. You blow up. Everyone within grenade range of you is killed, and you can't. You have to go back to respawn, something like that." But we were able to create that tool in the field without having any sort of intervention. Once the game had started, all of this would take care of itself on its own. And I was just so thrilled because the green team was able to find that case, use it, and trick the enemy into opening it and blowing, but basically a small group of players up, which was awesome. So this is super super easy to implement. I mean, the cases, like I said, I had them lying around. They were just gifted to me at some point. But you can get those from any secondhand store or like a Goodwill or whatever. And the stickers, I mean, I bought a pack of, I can't remember, the sticker sheets or whatever, maybe cost me $20 total. And that's it. Like you can just set that up, and then the paint and whatnot. The other thing that we did with the cases is we then hid them on the field. But I told players these cases are going to be hidden. They're not going to be in plain sight. They're going to be very difficult for you to find. And it took players a very long time to locate the case. So we had the 3-hour game. And by the end of the 3 hours, they had found 5 of the 8 cases. It was really funny because in the feedback survey that we got players to fill out, some players said there should have been more cases to find. And I was like, guys, y'all missed 3. I specifically hid them. Well, myself and Jeremy, I should say. I didn't do this by myself. Jeremy helped me. We went the night before so players would not see us putting anything on the field. And we hid them in places that were they were possible to find, but you actually would have to look. So, for example, on one of the fields, there's a mock helicopter, like a Comanche or Apache, like a gunship style helicopter. And so in the tail section, it's all made of wood, obviously. In the tail section is hollow, and so we actually were able to stuff one of the cases at the top of the tail section. So if you're just looking in, you won't see it. But if you stick your head into the tail section and look up, you'll see it. Well, one of the players was looking for that case for a very long time. They did a sweep of that field and they reported back to their commander saying, "Hey, there's nothing on the Blackhawk field. You don't have to worry about it." And I went back to the commander and I was like, "Hey, there actually is something on that field. You should look for it." And there's a couple of times throughout the day that I would drop hints, or Jeremy would drop hints to players indirectly by having really loud conversations or using certain words that made the players realize, "Hey, hang on, maybe they're saying something." So like we would stand next to the case, and I'd say to Jeremy, like, "Man, are you hot? I'm really hot right now." And Jeremy would be like, "Yeah, it's pretty hot here, but if we were to move away, it definitely would be cooler." "Yeah, man." And then so we'd move away, and then we would wait to see if players sort of picked up on sort of that hint that we just dropped. Um, or we would tell the commanders, indirectly um, like in communications over the radio or whatever, some hints, right? So we'd say, there was one case that was hidden inside a pallet on a particular field, and I remember they were having difficulty finding a case, and I told the commander, it's like, "Yeah, man, if you found a case right now, it'd be a lot more palatable if you get my meeting." Stuff like that, just to give them a hint to keep them sort of engaged. But the key component here is like players had something to do. They had to find those cases. Um, and for the majority of people, I think the feedback, well, from actually all the feedback that we got on that mechanic was excellent. People thought that looking for the cases was fun and engaging. Some of them wish they could have found some cases, which again is, it's unfortunate, but the whole idea, if we'd made it too obvious, the game would have lasted an hour. So we needed to make sure they were really well hidden. There's a couple of places where we hid them maybe a little bit too well. There's one hidden on the entrance to one of the wooded areas, and it was hidden at the base of a tree by some moss covered with some ferns. And It was visible, but only if you approached the tree from a particular direction. Otherwise, you couldn't see it. Um, that one probably was not probably too well hidden, let's call it. But there were other ones where they actually weren't that well hidden, but players actually would need to move stuff. And we had told them this. We said, everything's going to be hidden. Like, you have to move stuff around. And in on one of the areas of the village, there were these boards that were sort of propped up against one of the structures. And so what I had done is I had pulled the board down. I taped one of the cases to the back of that board, and I put it back up, and no player actually thought to move that board during the game. And in fact, during the last hour of the game, I purposefully knocked the board down so that the case would be facing up and taped, and still nobody noticed that it was there. So there's a little bit of that too. Like, you're always going to get situations where players are sometimes way more creative than you expected, and other times they don't see directly what's directly in front of them. So regardless of that, I think it was really well received. And this particular mechanic of giving them things to find on the field and interact with is something that we're going to keep for future games. Um, Other than that, at this particular game, we had Storm Riders commanders. So we had Cal commanding the red team, the People's Republic of Newfoundland team, the tan team, and then we had Jason Fong commanding the green team, the Association of Confederated Municipalities. Those are the two factions we're going to continue using in our ops in the future as well. Um, this event, we tried two new things in addition to the cases and stuff. We tried weapon classes for the game that was really well received, and we were very flexible with that. We let people change class. If they had multiple replicas, they could just change class at the fob, as long as the team didn't exceed whatever the limit was, and the commanders did a great job of keeping a handle on that. And then the other thing that we did was camo coordination. So camo requirements, green, tan. And then for players who didn't have camo, we just used armbands. So tan was red and green was blue. Um, in the future, I'm really hoping that, I mean, I'm going to talk about this in a second. We announced our next event for the month of November, which gives players over 2 months, or actually maybe just under 2 months at the time the podcast comes out, to go and acquire some camo in some way that matches one of the two factions. Um, and that's really the direction that we want to keep going with that. So hopefully players will. We didn't have too many players who showed up with no faction camo. That's definitely something we want to do, because I think it added a lot more to the event. Like, we have flags to represent both factions, and so hopefully for players who are interested in the RP side of Airsoft, that gives them something to lock into and to focus on a little bit. So that was Operation Neon Sunrise. The one we have coming up next month, or not next month, in November, is called Operation Phantom Shield. And Phantom Shield is sort of a summation combination of a lot of the different mechanics that we've tested over the last 12 months or 18 months since last year. Some of the things we tried didn't really work out very well. So the touchdown mechanic that we did with having the teams trying to bring something back to each side of the field, not super popular. People didn't love that, but people really do like the RP elements. People really enjoyed having stuff to do and find on the field. People want missions again. And so Phantom Shield is going to be sort of our attempt to bring all of that sort of together. So we're going to keep doing weapon classes, as I mentioned. We're going to keep doing the faction camos. But this event is going to include a little bit more RP opportunities. It's going to include missions for both teams. And the thing that we are really trying with this event, as opposed to other events, is really leaning into the milsim side of things. So for all of our ops, we've done briefings. We've made them as accessible as possible. And it's not to say that we're not going to make this accessible, but we want to just level up in terms of the milsim experience that players get by changing how we create our chain of command. So having commanders, but also having squad leaders, and like having an organization at that level. The terms that we use. So for those of you listening, in the United States and in other places who have attended milsim event, there's a lot of terms that you just take for granted that are part of milsim. Startx is at 0900. Index is at 1500. Well, the op-ord document is going to come out. The ROE is this, OPSEC is that. Like, all these military sounding terms, we've never used them at any of our events. The game starts at 9, the game ends at 3. You're going to get your rules document, right? All this kind of stuff. And for this event, we are still going to make it as accessible as I mentioned, but we're going to start using some of these terms uh, because we want to provide the players with a bit more of that milsim experience that we got to experience at Iron Horse. And you can do both, in my opinion. You can give the milsim, the milsim experience in places where it matters to people who want it, but also give the opportunity for players who maybe aren't interested or don't really care. They don't necessarily need to look at that. So at this event, I've prepared an op org document for both teams. The commanders, when they're chosen, can certainly modify them however they want, but the op org document follows standard op org structure, right? It has all the key elements that you would tend to see there. It has all the terms, talks about signals, talks about all the stuff that you would expect to see in those documents. What's unique about this op, though, is that unlike what we've done in the past, at this game, both teams have different objectives, and the objectives are unknown to each team. So the op board with the objectives is not going to go out until the teams are actually finalized. This is a big shift for us here because for the majority of our games, teams have been pretty flexible, right? If you show up on one day on the game day and you go, hey, like I did sign up for a red team, but now all my friends are on blue and I want to be on blue, we'd be like, okay, cool. That's not going to be possible now because we want to make sure that for both teams, they don't know what they're supposed to accomplish. And in fact, the way that myself and Kirby is helping me this time around for this event, what we're trying to do is set it up so that there is a very remote possibility that both teams can actually win. They can all complete their objectives because their objectives aren't mutually exclusive. Or not necessarily, or maybe I'll change my mind on that. I don't really know, and I'm not going to spoil it for anybody. But the whole intent here is the players are not going to know. So their focus during the day is going to be about completing their own work rather than trying to stop the enemy from doing something because you don't necessarily know, the players don't necessarily know whether or not that's relevant to them succeeding throughout the day. So this is also going to be a big shift and it's going to require a little bit more um a little bit more thinking and a little bit more growth in terms of how you approach the game of airsoft because at some of the, like when we went to Iron Horse for example, we were told, hey, you know what, there are players here, the only thing, squads A, squad B, whatever, they only want to shoot, like they're just here to kick down doors and blast and stuff like that, and so we'll get them doing that. But then for people who want to play the objective, that's your squads, you can do this, that, and so on and so forth. But our communities are too small, right? Our community, if we get 25 players per side, I'd be really happy with that. Well, with 25 players on the field that we have, you can't really afford to just have players not playing the objective and just going to blast because you're going to need every possible player you can to accomplish the missions that you need to accomplish. So, Operation Phantom Shield is going to be a really good opportunity for people who really want to play the objective and sort of challenge themselves in a different way to do that. I think this is going to be the most milsim that we've held, or I'm really hoping it's going to be, depending on the squads and like the signups and turnout and stuff. Um, but that's certainly one thing. I'm also really excited because one of the things that we're trying to do is to build a partnership with the Canadian Armed Forces. And so we have some contacts, and I've been talking to some people within the CAF to get them involved in some way, see how we can, collaborate with them so that our players and our community gets exposed to some of the things that they do in the CAF. We have many, many players in our community who are either former or current members of the Canadian Armed Forces, and people who are also interested in joining the Canadian Armed Forces who are in our community. And we thought that the partnership with the CAF would be a pretty natural one. So we'll be working with them to build this partnership in the long term to see what else would be possible. Ideally, we'd love to collaborate on hosting events elsewhere, not just at Frontline, but maybe on certain on private lands, for example. And having them as a partner would be a really good way to facilitate that. So that's something that's in the early days, but we're really hoping that we have some members of the CAF come out in an official capacity for Phantom Shield. That's something that I haven't talked about a whole lot, and we're still in the early days of that. But it looks like it's going to be possible, and it's super super interesting. So I'm really excited about Phantom Shield. I think we're going to be doing a lot of different things that are new, but we're also going to be doing a lot of things that players have been asking for and have given us really good feedback on. We got good feedback about the medic system. We've gotten good feedback on, as I mentioned, the cases from Neon Sunrise. We have really good feedback on the role playing and the actors and stuff. So we're going to try our best to include and incorporate all of those things and some new elements around props and missions and also utilizing the field in different ways. We've talked about this in the past on the podcast, I believe, but our field is relatively small, and so having 60 players at our field like we had for the first event of the year, um, that's you're reaching basically a limit of what is possible. In terms of player base in one big event. Now, there's lots of days at Frontline where you have more than 100 players on the field, but the gameplay is divided into multiple different areas. Our challenge is going to be how can we make sure that we utilize as much of the field as possible. So again, using props and missions and all that to make it happen. So those are the two big events that we have. I'm going to have more information about Phantom Shield as we get closer. Once the op boards go out, and then we'll do a wrap up of that at the end of the year as we've done in the past to give you a sense of like what worked well and what could have been a little bit better, and maybe if anything just falls off the rails, we'll be able to give you a sneak peek into that too. The last thing that I want to talk about today is something that's new for me, and that's nighttime play. So, for some interesting reason, this year our night events have been really popping off. At our frontline field during the summer months, there's two airsoft games, public games that are available every week. So there's a Saturday game that's in the morning from like 10 o'clock to 1 p.m. something like that. And I say something like that because it always is, generally we might run late or whatever. It's like whenever people decide, basically. But there's also the Thursday evening game, and that starts at 7 p.m. and it runs till about 10 o'clock. And I've never really, had a lot of time to go to these events. It's not something I've prioritized in the past, but this year I've been making more of an effort. I've been off, on holiday for the last couple of weeks, and so I've been using, my Thursday nights to go and check the field out. But for some reason, those games have routinely been getting bigger numbers than our Saturday games, 20, 30 players coming out to do nighttime play. And I haven't really done a lot of nighttime play in my time playing airsoft. I don't have nods or anything like that, as we talked about. So I said, well, we'll go. I've got a weapon light on my replica, so I might as well give it a shot. And it's been really cool. So for those of you who are familiar a little bit, and in the videos that we've done or talking about the podcast, the village field in our field is basically illuminated. It has giant, floodlights like baseball field lights or soccer field lights or whatever, um, or football as we call it. Um, so that part of the field is illuminated. Then the parking lot, of course, is illuminated, and a lot of that light spills over onto the parts of the field that are adjacent to the parking lot, but those fields aren't illuminated. And then there's also a wooded area, which we've called the woods or the woods field or big fort, like that area. And there's no illumination. And also it's very full of trees and like foliage and stuff. So that field is extremely dark once it gets dark. And so the nighttime play has been interesting because the first like hour of the game is basically just like a regular Saturday. It's just the sun is in a different position, but it's still the sun hasn't is not hiding behind the hills. So it's still fully illuminated. But then very quickly it gets dark. And once it gets dark, man, in the woods especially, it gets so dark and the play just completely changes. Stuff that is easy peasy to do in the day, like in the nighttime, is not viable. Fundamentally, like firstly, like if you, for example, are on the side of the field that is next to the parking lot and you're trying to move towards the village, well, you're backlit, right, by the lights, the floodlights in the parking lot. And the lights from the village don't actually spill into the wooded area or backlight any of the defenders in that area. So we were doing a rush game, and there comes a point where you actually can't advance because if you move, they will absolutely see you because you'll be silhouetted, and you won't be able to see them because they're in the bush, they're hiding, etc. And so it's a lot of trying to coordinate with your teammates to like flash a person to draw their attention so that you can then, try and engage them. Or try and flash them to blind them so you can daze them and then hit them or something like that. Um, so different. It's a completely, I don't want to say okay, it's not a completely different skill set, but it requires coordination in a way that in the day you can kind of get away with that, but in the nighttime, in my experience so far, it's just not a viable option. The second you move, you get blasted, right? Someone hears you move, you get blasted. People will lie in ambush and just wait a lot more than they do in the day. People tend to be, in my experience, last couple of games, people are super patient, like they're willing to wait it out. And that is not conducive to moving around. Whereas if you're moving around and they're moving around, it's 50-50 kind of situation. So the other thing that happens is once it really does get dark, the wooded areas no longer end up being used because you just can't see anything, right? And so in order to even navigate in those areas, and there's so many like potholes and like there's a little gully running through there or like boards and like it's a real hazard to move without a light. And if you move with a light, then you're just going to get blasted because you're giving away your position. So it's a different experience. Once it gets really dark, we tend to just stick around in the village. We've been playing tactical football. If you guys, and here I mean American football. If you remember, I had Big Red on the podcast a while ago, and he had mentioned that's they play a game of tactical football where the objective is for your team to have the football on the other half of, like, if you imagine the field divided in the middle, down the middle, the football has to end on the other team's side, and whoever's side the football ends on is the team that loses. And so what we've been doing in the village and in other fields too, but in the village at night is playing that. It gives the teams an opportunity to play a very quick game. We typically put like a 5-minute timer on it, unlimited respawns, and just try and figure out ways to make sure the football ends up on the other side. I played a variant of it where the rule was that you couldn't sit on the football on your side for more than a minute. So if the football was on the other side and you wanted to go and defend it, you certainly could do that. But if you couldn't just take the ball and then pull it on your side and just sit on it and just wait till the last second and throw it at the last minute or anything like that. And that was pretty interesting. It's a really fun game mode to play at night, and because it's unlimited respawns in 5 minutes, like the stakes aren't super high. As opposed to we did play like a rush game where we tried to rush across the entire field to attack the village, and trying to attack the village at night is just it's not super great. It's just asking for someone to get shot in the face up close, all this kind of stuff. So all that all is to say that it's been a learning experience for me. I've never in my life wanted nods more than I do now, to be honest, because when we played at Iron Horse, I didn't have nods either, but I was surrounded with people who had them, who could just make sure that I was being pointed in the right direction. And I could rely on someone seeing stuff that I couldn't see, but that's okay. I don't really need to see it. Just tell me where to point, tell me where to shoot, etc. But here, nobody sees anything. So there's been, lots of times where we're behind cover. I'm like, what do you see? Nothing. Okay, well, I have no idea where they are. They're probably waiting in an ambush there. We can try and flash them and see what happens. But it's always it always feels like it's more outside of my control than I would like. So looking at nods and saying, I wish I didn't have to spend like $4,000 for a set of them, but that's the going rate for a set of PVS 14s here in Canada. It's like by the time you get the mounting hardware and stuff, it's like $4,000. So it's just not in the cards. It's not something that I care enough about to invest in. But regardless, if you have the opportunity for nighttime play and you haven't done it, highly recommend it. I mean, you can get yourself a weapon light off Amazon for very, very cheap. You can get like a Feiyachi, a Chinese clone of, surefire situation. Is it the greatest in the world? No, of course not. But it'll be good enough to get you started to see if that's something that you're interested in. And I know for me, it's been a nice shakeup, a nice change of pace for sure. So I would highly recommend it. And if your field doesn't do night games, there's an opportunity there to think about it. I wouldn't necessarily recommend playing in the pitch dark with no nods, no illumination on the field, etc. But certainly if you have a game that can start in the evening or something like that, it might be worth checking it out. So yeah, that's been me for the last little while. I have also figured out most of my hop up issues and stuff like that. And what's so funny and just typical airsoft teching is that My max hop up was giving me the most trouble, and I switched to a VFC stock plastic rotary hop up, and it's great, and I have no problems. So what can you do? But that's just airsoft. So I've been really happy with the performance of my replica at these night games as well. Though I would very much stress the importance of having a properly zeroed optic, because once it gets dark, you cannot see your BBs, you can't track your BBs. So having a properly dialed optic that you know your distance holds on is absolutely critical, in my opinion. It's something that I need to get on and just make sure that I'm bang on as close as I can be. So yeah, so this is just a quick recap for you. You know, it's not as long as our typical episodes, but hopefully you will forgive me. I'm going to go back to my holiday preparations. But thank you so much for listening. Next week, tune in. We'll have a regular episode for you. Going to be wrapping up our conversation on border war with Ben and Ambo. Unfortunately, if you're on the Discord, you know Josh was sick and he wasn't able to attend Border War this year. So we'll be wrapping things up with Ben and Ambo. And then we have a couple of more guests, some new guests coming on the podcast in the coming weeks. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. I hope you have a great Labor Day week, and we will talk to you soon. Take care.